The Sky Visitors, continued. Sarah struggled as the metallic hands gripped her tighter, cold as ice and unyielding as steel. She tried to scream, but her voice stuck in her throat, strangled by a paralyzing fear she'd never known. She was lifted off the ground, pulled upwards, her bare feet brushing against the porch rail before she was yanked through her front door, into the night. Somewhere between her front lawn and the endless dark above, Sarah lost consciousness. When she awoke, she was lying on a table in a room that looked nothing like the world she knew. The walls seemed to ripple and pulse like they were alive, bending and twisting as if made of liquid metal. Strange lights hummed above her, casting an eerie greenish glow that only deepened her sense of dread. Sarah tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't respond. All she could do was stare, eyes darting around the alien chamber, heart pounding. A face appeared above her, or rather something that resembled a face. Asriel. His eyes gleamed, narrow slits of black that reflected her terror like polished mirrors. He tilted his head, watching her as though she were some peculiar specimen in a jar. "You are curious," he murmured, the corners of his mouth curling into a twisted smile. "So much fear, yet so much resilience." Sarah managed to force out a single shaking word. "Why?" Azrael leaned closer, his face a blur of strange angles and shifting patterns. "Why not?" he replied softly. "Your world, your lives, they are fragile, fleeting. We study what we conquer. We remake what we touch." Before Sarah could process his words, a cold needle slid into her arm. Sharp pains shot up her limb, and her vision dimmed once more, plunging her into darkness. When she awoke again, she was back in Middleton, lying in the middle of Main Street under a cold morning sky. Around her, others were stirring, rubbing their eyes and looking around in confusion. Children clung to their parents, fear in their tear-streaked faces. Sarah glanced down at her arms, her legs. Everything seemed normal, untouched. But as she met the gazes of those around her, she saw the same question in their eyes. What had they done to us? The townsfolk began to gather in small clusters, whispering frantically, checking themselves and each other, looking for any sign of what had happened. But as the hours passed, nothing seemed to miss. No one had marks or injuries, no memories beyond a chilling, dreamlike impression of lights and voices in the dark. Over the next few days, life tried to stumble back to normalcy, though Middleton was far from the town it had been. People avoided eye contact, speaking in hushed tones as though afraid that raising their voices would somehow call the visitors back. They tried to convince themselves it had all been a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by mass hysteria. But deep down, they all knew the truth. They had been taken, touched by something beyond their understanding, something that wasn't finished with them. The first sign of the change came when Billy Thompson, the principal's son, walked into school one morning, covered in what looked like scars. A latticework of tiny, precise cuts that glistened in the morning light like the metal walls of the chamber Sarah remembered. Billy seemed fine, cheerful even, smiling and waving at his friends as if nothing was wrong. But when his teacher tried to ask him about the scars, he looked at her with an expression that chilled her to the bone. A blank, unblinking stare, almost as if he didn't recognize her. More children began to show similar marks over the next few days, and some adults too. The scars seemed to appear overnight, forming strange symbols and patterns that no one could understand. But it wasn't just the marks that unnerved the townsfolk. Those who bore them began to change in other ways. They became quieter, detached, staring off into the distance as though listening to something only they could hear. Then one night, Sarah woke to the sound of music echoing through the streets. It wasn't any tune she knew, a haunting, eerie melody that seemed to come from every direction at once. She stepped outside, and as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw them. Dozens of people, young and old, were standing in the middle of Main Street, swaying back and forth. Eyes closed. The marks on their skin glowed faintly, casting an unnatural light on their faces. They moved in unison, like dancers caught in a trance, their lips moving soundlessly in time with the strange melody. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched them. She wanted to run, to scream, but she couldn't look away. She felt drawn to them, a compulsion she couldn't explain. Slowly she stepped forward, her feet carrying her toward the crowd as though they had a mind of their own. Just as she reached the edge of the group, the music stopped. Every head turned in unison to look at her, their eyes glowing with a strange, unearthly light. For a moment she thought she saw Azrael's face in each of them, his dark eyes reflecting her fear, his smile a cruel mockery. "You're one of us now, Sarah," they whispered, their voices merging into one, a low hum that resonated in her bones. "We are connected, linked by something greater than your kind can understand." "No," Sarah whispered, backing away. I'm not one of you." But as she spoke, she felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest, a tingling that reminded her of the sensation she'd felt that night under Azrael's gaze. She looked down and saw a faint light pulsing beneath her skin, growing brighter with each beat of her heart. Sarah's hands flew to her arms, her fingers tracing the marks that hadn't been there moments before. The intricate lines and symbols glowed faintly, warm to the touch, a part of her, yet foreign. She staggered back, horrified, but there was no escape. She could feel them, the others, in her mind, their thoughts brushing against her own, like whispers in the dark. As she looked around, she saw the townsfolk smiling, their faces filled with an eerie serenity. They stepped forward, reaching out to her, welcoming her into their fold. And despite every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, Sarah felt her resistance fading, her fear melting into an inexplicable calm. In her mind, Asriel's voice echoed softly, soothing her like a lullaby. "There is no need to fear, Sarah. We are all one now. We have been chosen, remade, reborn." And as she took her place among them, Sarah knew she would never leave Middleton. She belonged to them now, to the Sky Visitors and the new life they had crafted. The town was forever changed, its people bound together by a force beyond their understanding. By the following summer, Middleton was a ghost town, its streets empty, its homes silent. Those who dared to pass through spoke of strange lights flickering in the night, whispers carried on the wind, and an unsettling sense of being watched. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, they would see shadows moving in the abandoned streets, glowing with an otherworldly light, as though the town itself were alive. The visitors had left their mark, not only on the people of Middleton, but on the town itself. For those who remained, those forever touched by the sky, were more than human now. They were something else, something waiting, watching, and listening for the next voice that would call them to the stars. And so Middleton became a place of legend, a cautionary tale told in hushed voices, around campfires and whispered among travelers. But no one dared linger long in the town of the Sky Visitors, where shadows walked at night and the air hummed with a strange, haunting melody that never truly faded.